One handshake between Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra. How it almost ended their friendship. The world watched as two of the most legendary figures in music and Hollywood, Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra, faced a tense moment that could have shattered their lifelong friendship. It all came down to one handshake. What happened in that instant changed their relationship forever, and no one expected what came next. Where are you watching from? Tell us in comments and share and subscribe our channel for interesting stories like this. Let's dive into the story. Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra were more than just friends. They were icons of an era, the embodiment of old Hollywood's charm and glamour. Their bond was legendary, formed through years of collaboration, mutual respect, and shared success. But as with many great friendships, cracks began to appear in the foundation. At the heart of their tension was their differing temperaments. Sinatra, ever the perfectionist and ambitious leader, while Martin, the easygoing, fun-loving crooner, seemed content to let life unfold at its own pace. However, their friendship wasn't just built on their personal connection. It was also a partnership that fed the public's insatiable appetite for entertainment. They had both risen from humble beginnings, and together they formed the Rat Pack, a group that took the world by storm. But beneath the glitz and glamour, the pressure of maintaining their public personas, plus the undercurrents of their individual ambitions, were beginning to take a toll. The stakes were higher than ever. Could their friendship survive the demands of fame, or would one pivotal moment tear them apart? To understand the weight of the situation, it's important to grasp who they were outside of the spotlight. Dean Martin, born Dino Paul Crocetti, was known for his suave persona, his effortless charm, and his ability to make everything seem easy. Yet, beneath that smooth exterior, he battled his own insecurities, often finding solace in alcohol. He had a family, but the stresses of his career took their toll, leading to a broken marriage and a strained relationship with his children. Despite this, Martin's humor and relaxed nature allowed him to maintain a facade of success and happiness. Sinatra, on the other hand, was a different beast. He was driven, ambitious, and obsessive about his career. Raised in a tough neighborhood, he was determined to rise above his working-class roots and become more than just another crooner. As one of the most successful entertainers in the world, Sinatra's drive was relentless, and he didn't take failure lightly. His intensity clashed with Martin's laid-back approach, creating a tension that neither of them was willing to address directly. But in the coming months, it would all come to a head. The friction between them was palpable. Rumors of a rift spread like wildfire, with Sinatra pushing Martin to take their act more seriously, while Martin was content to let things roll with a more relaxed approach. The tipping point came one night after a high-stakes performance. Sinatra had been deeply frustrated by what he saw as Martin's lack of commitment to the act. The audience loved them both, but Sinatra demanded more. The pressure mounted as Sinatra's perfectionist streak collided with Martin's aversion to being constantly pushed. The tension in the room could have been cut with a knife. It was clear that Sinatra was displeased, but instead of addressing the issue head-on, he chose to make a public gesture. A handshake, one simple gesture, was about to set the stage for a confrontation that neither man saw coming. As the two men stood backstage, surrounded by their crew, the moment felt heavy with unspoken words. It was a handshake that would either mend or break their fractured bond. But neither of them could have predicted how it would unfold. The night of the handshake came, and the atmosphere was charged. Dean Martin had just finished a set, his usual easygoing smile still in place, but something was off. Sinatra, standing at the edge of the stage, had his eyes locked on him, his jaw clenched. He could feel the frustration boiling inside him, frustration that had been building for weeks. The audience had adored them, but to Sinatra, it wasn't enough. He wanted more from Martin, more dedication, more focus. The two had always been able to read each other like an open book, but tonight, the distance between them felt like a chasm. As they met backstage, Sinatra extended his hand, not with the usual warmth but with an edge to it, a challenge. Dean looked at the hand, hesitated for a moment, then took it. The handshake was firm, but the coldness between them was undeniable. Neither man said anything, but the gesture spoke volumes. Sinatra's eyes held a hard edge, while Martin's smile was more forced than ever before. In that instant, the tension between them was palpable, and the crowd that had adored them for years was about to see their bond tested like never before. What would happen next was beyond anyone's imagination. The aftermath of the handshake was immediate and undeniable. It wasn't just an awkward moment, it was a pivotal one that would test the very core of their friendship. Back in their private quarters, both men sat in silence, the weight of the moment hanging heavy between them. Sinatra couldn't let go of his disappointment, his perfectionist drive burning like an eternal flame. For him, this wasn't just about the performance, it was about the bigger picture. Martin had always been the relaxed one, the one who didn't seem to take life or fame as seriously as he did. Sinatra's ambition knew no bounds, and that sometimes made him feel isolated, like he was pulling all the weight of their success. But what hurt the most was the sense that Martin, despite his incredible talent, wasn't carrying his share. The sting of betrayal felt raw, and as Sinatra sat there, he couldn't help but wonder if he had been foolish to ever let someone like Martin so close to his inner circle. Dean, on the other hand, knew exactly what Sinatra was feeling but was hesitant to confront it. The pain of watching someone you've known and loved for so long drift away was too much to bear. But what hurt more was the fact that he felt like he couldn't fix it. Not tonight. The next few days were marked by an eerie silence between the two. They saw each other on stage, of course, performing, smiling for the cameras, playing the roles that the world expected of them. But behind the scenes, everything was strained. It wasn't just about the handshake anymore. The cracks were showing in their friendship, and neither man knew how to mend them. Sinatra was pushing harder than ever before, not just in his performances, but in everything he did. He threw himself into his work with a cold, relentless drive, barely acknowledging Martin's presence when they weren't on stage. It was as though he was punishing him, but he didn't know why. Meanwhile, Martin, normally the calm and easygoing one, was increasingly withdrawn. He knew that Sinatra's anger was rooted in more than just the performance. It was a culmination of their years of friendship, of their different approaches to life and career. But what could he do? Dean had always prided himself on his ability to avoid confrontation, to let things slide. Yet this time, he felt cornered, as though the weight of the world was bearing down on him. The tension was building, and something had to give. Neither man was ready to face it head-on, and the pressure was mounting by the day. The situation finally came to a head one evening after a particularly tense rehearsal. Sinatra had been fuming all day, and as the rehearsal wrapped up, he couldn't contain his frustration any longer. Dean was about to leave when Sinatra approached him, his voice low but full of anger. "You think you're just gonna coast through this, huh?" he said, eyes hard. Martin, who had been trying his best to stay out of the line of fire, felt a sharp pang in his chest. This wasn't the Sinatra he knew, the one who had been his partner, his friend. This was someone else, someone who felt betrayed, abandoned, and let down. "Frank, I'm doing the best I can," Martin responded, his voice barely above a whisper, but the weight of the words was enough. Sinatra didn't respond immediately, his face contorting as though he was trying to hold back a tidal wave of emotions. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time, Martin felt truly alone, as though Sinatra had finally crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. They were standing on the edge of something irreversible, and neither of them was willing to step back. But it was at this moment, in the stillness of the room, that Dean realized the depth of their conflict. If they didn't address it now, everything they had worked for would be lost. The next night, during the performance, the tension was undeniable. The crowd could feel the difference, though they couldn't name it. Sinatra, normally the embodiment of confidence, was visibly agitated. His energy was frenetic, and his normally smooth delivery was sharp and erratic. Martin, meanwhile, went through the motions, his usual charm and charisma still present, but his smile no longer reached his eyes. It was as though the magic had been drained from him, replaced by a quiet sadness that echoed in every note he sang. As the night wore on, the frustration between the two men grew, and the crowd, ever hungry for drama, began to pick up on the subtle tension between them. Then came the moment that everyone feared, the moment when it all spilled out in front of the world. In the middle of a performance, Sinatra made an offhand comment about Martin's lack of dedication, a remark that was louder than any of his previous passive-aggressive jabs. It cut through the music, through the atmosphere, like a knife. The audience gasped, and Martin froze. For the first time, Dean's composure cracked. He didn't respond with words. He simply stepped back, turned his back to Sinatra, and walked off the stage. The audience was left in stunned silence, unsure of what they had just witnessed. But the damage was done, and neither man knew how to undo it. The fallout from that night was immediate. The media picked up the story faster than anyone anticipated, and soon, the public's curiosity was insatiable. The Rat Pack, once a symbol of unity, was now a fractured group, torn apart by pride, ambition, and unspoken frustrations. Fans, who had always seen Dean and Frank as inseparable, were in shock. The public confrontation had shaken the very foundation of their legendary bond. Behind closed doors, the tension only worsened. Sinatra's guilt was palpable, but his pride would not allow him to admit any wrongdoing. He had pushed Martin to the edge, but now he wasn't sure how to fix it. Martin, too, was struggling. He knew that Sinatra's anger had been building for a long time, but he hadn't realized just how deep the resentment had gone. The hurt was more than just a professional disagreement, it was a personal betrayal. Martin had always looked up to Sinatra, admired him, even followed his lead. Now, he was questioning whether the man he had called a friend was still the person he thought he knew. The tension reached its peak when they were scheduled to meet privately after the performance. There was no avoiding it anymore. Both men knew that something had to be said, but neither of them knew where to begin. This wasn't just about a handshake anymore, it was about the destruction of a friendship that had defined both of their lives. The private meeting between Sinatra and Martin was tense from the moment they sat down. Neither spoke immediately. The room was thick with the weight of their shared history and the silent pain that had taken root between them. Sinatra, his jaw clenched, looked at Martin but didn't say a word. Martin, on the other hand, was too hurt to say anything at first. The anger in Sinatra's eyes was undeniable, but so was the vulnerability that was starting to creep through. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Sinatra broke the silence. "You don't get it, Dean," he said, his voice low but intense. "I've worked my ass off for everything we have. And I gave you everything. But you just coast along, like it doesn't matter. Like nothing matters." Martin's face tightened, but he didn't respond. Instead, he looked down, the weight of Sinatra's words sinking in. "I've always done my best, Frank," he finally said, his voice barely audible. "But maybe my best isn't enough for you anymore." There was a long pause before Sinatra spoke again, this time softer. "I didn't want it to be like this, Dean. But you've got to meet me halfway. I can't carry it all." The words hung in the air, and for the first time in their friendship, both men understood the depth of the rift between them. It wasn't just about the performance, it was about years of unmet expectations, of silent resentments that had been building over time. But even as they spoke, either man knew how to bridge that gap. The public moment of reckoning came sooner than either expected. The next evening, as they took the stage, the atmosphere was tense, heavy with the unspoken animosity between them. The audience, oblivious to the backstage drama, cheered as the two men walked out. But something was different. The easy camaraderie that had always defined their performances was gone. Instead, there was an air of discomfort, a hesitation in their movements that betrayed the friction between them. Sinatra, as always, took the lead, but this time, there was something different in his approach. He was more deliberate, more controlled, as if trying to maintain some semblance of power in the face of their shattered relationship. Martin, on the other hand, seemed detached, his usual playful demeanor replaced by a quiet sadness. Their performance, though technically perfect, lacked the magic that had once made it so special. For a moment, it felt as though the crowd could sense the tension, as if they knew something had changed. But it wasn't until the end of the show that the real moment of reckoning came. As the applause died down and the lights dimmed, Sinatra extended his hand to Martin, a gesture that felt both familiar and foreign. Martin looked at the outstretched hand, his heart pounding in his chest. This was the moment where everything would either come crashing down or be repaired in one simple gesture. The room fell silent as Dean Martin stood there, looking at Sinatra's hand, the years of friendship and the weight of their conflict all flooding his mind at once. In that split second, the entire world seemed to stop. What was left of their friendship? Was it possible to mend what had been broken? The history they shared, the countless moments of laughter and camaraderie, all seemed to hang in the balance. Martin's heart ached as he realized that the friendship he had cherished was slipping away, but he wasn't ready to let go, not yet. Slowly, he reached out and took Sinatra's hand. The handshake was firm, but there was no warmth in it, only the heavy weight of what had transpired. The crowd held their breath, unsure of what to make of the moment. Sinatra's expression softened just slightly, and for a brief instant, it seemed as though the years of tension had melted away. But as they stood there, side by side, neither of them knew what would come next. Would they truly be able to move past this, or would this handshake be the final nail in the coffin of their once inseparable bond? It was a moment of quiet resolution, but it was also a moment filled with doubt. The world would have to wait to see what came next. The days following the handshake were tense but marked by a strange quiet between Dean and Frank. There was a subtle shift in the way they interacted, as though they were both testing the waters of their fractured friendship, unsure if the damage could be repaired. Sinatra, despite his usual bravado, found himself questioning whether he had pushed too hard. He was known for his fiery personality and his drive, but in the aftermath of the handshake, a sense of doubt lingered. Had he been too harsh on Martin? Could he have handled the situation differently? Sinatra, who had always been in control, now found himself struggling with his emotions. Martin, on the other hand, seemed to withdraw even more, retreating into himself as he processed everything that had happened. He had always been the more easygoing of the two, but now, the weight of Sinatra's expectations seemed to crush him. His smile was less frequent, his laughter more forced. For the first time, Martin's carefree nature seemed like a distant memory. As they performed together once more, the crowd could feel the shift. The chemistry that once defined them was no longer present, and yet, they pushed forward, performing as if nothing had changed. The public couldn't see the emotional turmoil brewing just beneath the surface, but it was clear to both men that their relationship had reached a breaking point. They were still standing side by side on stage, but the divide between them had never felt wider. The breaking point came a few weeks later, after another tense performance. This time, Martin's frustration could no longer be contained. As the show wrapped up, he stormed off stage, unable to hold back his feelings any longer. Sinatra, sensing the tension, followed him backstage, his temper flaring. The confrontation that had been building for months finally erupted. "You think this is all just a joke, don't you?" Sinatra's voice was low but seething with anger. "You don't take this seriously, and it's driving me crazy." Martin turned to face him, his eyes tired but resolute. "I've always done my best, Frank. But maybe my best isn't good enough for you," he shot back, his voice breaking with the weight of his emotions. "You're never satisfied. No matter what I do, it's never enough for you." The room was thick with the tension of their words, the years of unspoken resentment finally spilling out. Sinatra's face twisted with frustration, but there was a flicker of something else beneath the anger, guilt, maybe, or regret. He had pushed Martin too far, but admitting that to himself felt like an impossible task. The two men stood there, locked in their anger, the distance between them now palpable and undeniable. It felt as though everything they had worked for, everything they had been through together, was slipping away, and neither knew how to stop it. For a brief moment, there was a silence between them, broken only by the sound of their heavy breathing. Neither spoke, as the weight of their words hung in the air, suffocating any possibility of resolution. But in the silence that followed, something unexpected happened. Dean Martin, usually the one to defuse situations with humor or a quick retreat, didn't look away. Instead, he met Sinatra's gaze, his expression one of quiet resolve. The years of their friendship, of laughter and shared memories, flashed before him. Sinatra, despite his harsh words and the pressure he had placed on Martin, was still the man who had been there through thick and thin. As the silence stretched on, Martin did something no one expected. He stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, and reached out his hand once more. Sinatra, caught off guard, hesitated. But then, after what felt like an eternity, he took Martin's hand. It was a moment of vulnerability for both of them, something that neither had expected, nor wanted, but something that seemed to break the tension between them. They didn't say anything. There were no grand apologies or dramatic speeches. It was just a simple, quiet moment of understanding, an acknowledgement that their friendship was worth saving, even if it meant facing their demons. For a brief second, it felt like they had come full circle. But as Sinatra gripped Martin's hand, something shifted inside both men. This wasn't just about business, fame, or expectations. It was about the bond they had shared for so long. And in that moment, both men knew that the road ahead would be tough, but it was one they would walk together. The crowd could feel the shift. In the days that followed their quiet reconciliation, there was a subtle change in the way Sinatra and Martin interacted. It wasn't perfect, and the air still crackled with tension from time to time, but there was a renewed sense of respect between them. The pressure that had once weighed so heavily on their shoulders seemed to lessen, if only slightly. But the public couldn't see that. To them, Sinatra and Martin were still the Rat Pack, the dynamic duo of Hollywood. But behind the scenes, both men had to work through the emotional fallout of their confrontation. Sinatra's pride had been bruised, and Martin's sense of self-worth had been shattered. There were still moments of strain, still times when the old frustrations would rise to the surface. But they knew that the road to healing wasn't going to be easy. It would take time, effort, and understanding. And though neither man knew it yet, this moment would mark the beginning of a new phase in their relationship. One where they would have to learn to meet each other halfway, to compromise, and to let go of the old resentments that had kept them apart for so long. The process would be slow, but for the first time in a long while, they both had hope that they could rebuild what had been broken. The tension between Dean and Frank didn't vanish overnight, but a shift began to take place, albeit subtly. As the days turned into weeks, Sinatra started to soften, if only slightly. His usual sharpness remained, but there was something different about his demeanor. He was less demanding, more reflective, and for the first time in years, he seemed willing to listen. Martin, though, wasn't as quick to let go of the hurt. His natural charisma had returned, but there was a quiet sadness in his eyes, as if he was still processing the betrayal he'd felt. He didn't immediately forgive Sinatra, not fully. Trust, he realized, couldn't be rebuilt in a moment, especially after so much had been left unspoken. But he did something he hadn't done in a long time. He started to open up. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't comfortable, but it was necessary. Over late-night conversations in dimly lit lounges and long car rides between shows, they slowly began to understand each other again. Martin shared his feelings of inadequacy and how the constant pressure had chipped away at his sense of self. Sinatra, on the other hand, revealed the intense fear he carried, fear of losing everything he had worked for, fear of being overshadowed by those he held close. These moments of honesty, though fleeting, began to break down the walls that had stood between them. And slowly, very slowly, they began to find common ground again. It was during one of these conversations, long after their reconciliation, that the truth finally came out. Sinatra, in his typically direct way, finally addressed the elephant in the room. "You know, I pushed you too hard, Dean," he admitted, his voice quieter than usual, as if confessing a secret that had been eating away at him for years. "I thought you could handle it, but I didn't realize what it was doing to you. I'm sorry." Martin sat back in his chair, absorbing the weight of Sinatra's words. It wasn't the apology he had expected, nor the one he had hoped for, but it was enough. For the first time, Sinatra had acknowledged the toll his ambition had taken on their friendship. It wasn't just about the performances, the expectations, or the fame. It was about their lives and how they had lived them. "You always made it seem so easy, Frank," Martin said, his voice tinged with sadness. "Like you could carry the world on your shoulders. But I didn't realize how much it was breaking you, too." Sinatra paused, then nodded. "I couldn't let anyone see it," he confessed. "But you always knew, didn't you? You saw right through me." The vulnerability in his voice was something that neither of them had shared before. And in that moment, the weight of their history, their successes, and their failures came crashing down. But it wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of something new, a new understanding, a new appreciation for each other's struggles. They had both been carrying burdens in silence, and now, finally, they could lay them down together. In the days that followed, their friendship began to feel like it had before, different, but stronger. The public never knew the true extent of the rift between Sinatra and Martin, but those who worked closely with them could see it. There was no more tension on stage, no more forced smiles or awkward pauses. They were performing with the same magic they had once shared, but now there was an unspoken bond of mutual respect that hadn't been there before. They still had their differences, Sinatra's drive, Martin's easygoing nature, but there was a newfound understanding between them. For Martin, the pressure to be the man Sinatra expected him to be had lifted. He didn't have to prove himself anymore. He could just be Dean. Sinatra, too, had come to realize that he didn't need to control everything or everyone around him. He didn't need to carry the weight of their friendship on his own. They had weathered the storm together, and in that shared silence, they had found a new way forward. But even as they stood side by side, performing for sold-out crowds, the memory of their rift lingered, quiet, but ever present. And that, in its own way, made their bond stronger than ever before. They had survived something that could have torn them apart. And now, every note they sang, every laugh they shared, was a testament to the fact that they had come out the other side, changed, but intact. As time passed, the legend of their friendship and the drama that nearly ended it became a part of Hollywood lore. Their reconciliation, though private, was whispered about by those who had witnessed the transformation in their relationship. The public may have seen the same old Rat Pack, glamorous, fun, and unbreakable, but behind the scenes, it was clear that something had shifted. Both men had been through the fire and emerged from it stronger. Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra's story was one of triumph over personal and professional challenges, a story of reconciliation and understanding, and a story of two icons who had found a way to preserve their bond, despite the odds. It wasn't the performance that mattered, Sinatra would later reflect in an interview. It was the moments in between. And Martin, with his trademark wit, would add, "We didn't need a perfect handshake to make it work, we just needed to trust each other again." Their friendship became a symbol of the complexities of human connection, how even the closest of bonds can falter but still be salvaged with honesty, vulnerability, and time. The story of their friendship would live on, not just in the music they made, but in the way they had chosen to face their demons together, and in the quiet strength that came from knowing they had weathered the storm, side by side. Sometimes, the toughest battles are fought not on stage, but in the silence between two people. Dean and Frank's friendship was one of the greatest of its time, but even legends must face their challenges. What do you think it takes to repair a friendship after such a rift? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this.